Vina Victoria, better known until the recent release of her altar as Siege, although realistically you just refer to that as Siege Altar and not Vina Victoria. She's one of the OGs, an operator that has accompanied many of us since our first steps onto Terra. Not me though, I got Saria first, so I was always a based American enjoyer as opposed to a British simp. But despite that, Siege acquired a special place in my heart as time went on. I could tell you that's because I found her story compelling, or that her good looks attracted me to her. That would be a lie. I do appreciate those things, but the true reason I, and I'm sure many others, fell in love with her is because she shares a vice with another of fiction's British kings. Although Saber, Siege is not. Although they might have some similar character beats, their journey to the crown is very different, as you would imagine. And so today, I want to discuss the journey of Siege's life, from what we know of her early life, to finally stepping into her role as a ruler. Although I won't be touching on the Siege Altar event too much, consider this a primer for that event video if you must. What I want this video to cover primarily is her role and character throughout the Victoria crisis, the weight that she carries into her journey to the throne of Victoria, and her reluctance to become its monarch. But before we discuss any of that, we need to talk about Vina's early life. Alexandrina Victoria, before she became the operator we all know and love, she was just a young girl born into royalty, the daughter of Alistair II. This of course made sure her early life would be free from the pain and suffering that typically befalls the lower classes. Fancy clothes, good food, not being expected to work the mines despite yearning for them as all children do, Vina seemed destined for greatness. 26 years before the events of the Victoria crisis, at a royal feast, Siege would appear before the crowd atop the Beast Lord Gawain, alongside the legendary Size of Kings, the sword that symbolizes the right to rule. You can imagine how those in attendance took such a sight. Here was a child already chosen by that legendary blade to lead Victoria into the future. But things would not be all rainbows and sunshine from here, as the shadows of conspiracy were already moving within Victoria. Due to the waning influence of the Victorian economy, Alistair had decided to implement a new tax policy to improve the situation. A horrible and regressive policy that turned the country against the crown. He decided to tax the nobles of Parliament. Oh, did I say horribly unpopular with the country? No, I meant horribly unpopular with the rich. This insult to their noble heritage would not go unpunished, and a coup was organized. The nobles turned the general public against their king, and he was overthrown. Kinda based to be killing kings, unfortunately it was not so that the dukes could actually help the commoners. Alistair was hanged alongside Allerdale's father, the Duke of Cumberland, Robert, but before his death, he organized the escape of his daughter, and had Vina smuggled out of the castle and onto the streets of Londinium. This would not only ensure that Vina would survive, but also denied the dukes a puppet monarch to put on the throne. As such, the throne of Victoria would sit empty. None of the dukes who overthrew their king had enough power and influence to take it for themselves, so Victoria sat in this state of paralysis, being unable to move past the status quo set in place by the dukes. As for Vina, after escaping through the underground of Londinium, she would find herself living on the street and struggling to survive. But survive she did. Through sheer dumb luck, and with a little guidance from Gawain, Vina adopted the name Siege, and eventually found herself in Norport. Here, Siege would meet the Glasgow Gang, a local street gang of no real renown. Led by Indra, Morgan, and Baird, the group would come into conflict with Siege, who intended to challenge Indra for leadership. Considering that Siege is now the leader of the gang, you can imagine how that went. Her time in Norport would be enjoyable, finally gaining a close group of friends. Siege spent most of her time keeping the peace in the community, while enjoying lighthearted days with her new group of friends. But things were not to last. The dukes had invited the Sorcas into the city of Londinium to provide aid as a mercenary force. Unfortunately for the dukes, Teresa's had some other plans. Thus began the Sorcas' occupation of the city. The Steam Knights went missing, and the Tower Knights were destroyed. Except for one member, Dagda, who made her way to Norport where she joined up with the Glasgow gang. Although she was intending to simply take Siege to put her on the throne, Siege had other plans. She revealed her true identity as the heir to the throne to the core members of the Glasgow gang. You can imagine how that went down with Indra and Morgan. A literal queen had been running a street gang for years at this point. Seeing the writing on the walls though, Siege made the difficult decision to leave Londinium in order to search for help with the Sorca's occupation. Although not all of Glasgow would accompany her, Siege left Norport with Indra, Morgan and Dagda and made her way to Rhodes Island, where they would spend the next few years preparing for their return to Londinium. Calcid and Amia were the only two who knew of Siege's royal heritage, but unbeknownst to Siege, the assistance of Rhodes Island against the Casdell Military Commission was more than just to support 4 of their operators. The time for Siege's return to Victoria wouldn't take too long, as following the Chonabug crisis, Rhodes Island would begin making preparations to travel to Victoria. And now we enter the Victoria crisis proper, which is to say chapter 10 to 14. Siege journeys through her homeland to find her purpose. Is it to be the returning king to liberate her people, or is it to be a king forced to sit on her throne as nothing more than a symbol? Regardless, what happens to Siege is a little something I like to call suffering Bill's character. So, chapter 10, which we shall be calling the Sanguinarch incident. Siege alongside Rhodes Island have arrived on the outskirts of Londinium and are preparing to infiltrate the city. Dagda and Indra successfully rescue an informant from Dublin and intend to use his knowledge to find a way into the city. Since Siege has left, the Sorcas have altered the city quite substantially. Most notable is the giant cannons along its walls, which have been altered to fire within city limits. Anyone who has played Chapter 10 can attest to the strength of them. While making preparations, Rhodes Island encounters the Self-Salvation Corps, a local group of resistance fighters within Londinium, made up entirely of civilians. Not one to say no to a bit of help, Rhodes Island forms an alliance with them, and as such, one group led by Amia heads off to rescue members of the group, while Siege stays behind to protect their underground base. Things above ground don't go exactly to plan, but it's not unsalvageable. Unfortunately for Siege though, the Sanguinarch makes his way underground. The ancient vampire begins effortlessly tearing apart the members of the Salvation Corps. Siege is a little outmatched in this scenario, so all she can do is fend off his attacks while retreating. Luckily for everyone with her, Siege has been through these tunnels before as a child. She discovers a control panel on the wall that is their key to salvation. With some quick thinking, Siege uses it to raise the platform that they are standing on to the surface, escaping the Sanguinarch. Cause, let's be real, I take my chances with the cannons of Londinium over fighting the Sanguinarch in a cramped environment underground any day. Upon reaching the surface, Siege reunites with the main force of Rhodes Island, and they escape on the train to Londinium, really only being saved thanks to the timely arrival of Teresa. Also, because I won't get to mention it otherwise, Horn alongside Victorian soldiers and Misery fought Manfred to destroy the cannon overlooking the area. Horn will be somewhat important later, as in she will exist and be involved in Siege's story. We don't have to worry about it right now. So, upon reaching Londinium proper, Siege is reunited with her old friend Allerdale, leader of the Salvation Corps, who intends to have Siege lead Victoria against the Sorcas. Which takes us nicely onto chapter 11, which we shall call the Allerdale incident. With a title like that, you can imagine what's in store for our Lion King. But before that, the cornerstone of Siege's character in this chapter, the Size of Kings. Arknights is a legendary sword in the stone, the symbol of the Aslan's right to rule, safely stored away in its mausoleum. Allerdale intends to have Siege retrieve the weapon, and for her to use the influence that the weapon provides to take control of the Victorian people and throw off the yoke of Sorca's oppression. However, the brief reprieve from the conflict does not last long. Letho, a Gaulish supporter of the military commission, orders the purge of the nobles residing within the area Siege and Rhodes Island have taken refuge in. The Sanguinarch, yes, he's back again, even burns down Allerdale's home, taking the last of the Cumberland servants as well as her family's streamlined armor with it. Luckily, most of Rhodes Island and the Salvation Corps is safe, but the effect it has on Allerdale and Siege is immense. But the planned offensive must continue. Rhodes Island and the Salvation Corps lead a direct attack on the Casdellian forces in order to attract attention away from their real goal. Siege meanwhile leads the Glasgow gang as well as a team of hired mercenaries to the underground mausoleum of the Victorian kings. It is here where they discover the remains of the Steam Knights. The reason why the Sorcas never fought them back when they took control over Londinium is that they had already been betrayed by the nobles and walked headfirst into an ambush. It is among these fallen heroes that Siege would find the Size of Kings, and where the treachery of the dukes would once again strike. Allerdale demands Siege hand over the Realm Blade. The Duke of Castor had sent her to retrieve the weapon so that she may use the authority it grants to take over Victoria. Before a fight can break out though, the last Steam Knight makes his appearance. The towering figure refuses to allow the sword to be taken and begins attacking the two groups. They are completely outmatched by the might of the Steam Knight. The weapon Siege risked everything for is no more effective than her hammer against the last bastion of Victoria. Seeing that everything is likely to end in disaster if they stay, Allerdale uses her arts to collapse the mausoleum, sealing herself inside with the Steam Knight while allowing Siege to escape, finally placing her fate in Siege as opposed to the empty promises of the Dukes. Unfortunately, things went just as bad for the attackers above ground, and Rhodes Island and the Self-Salvation Corps are almost destroyed by the Sorkas, with the chapter ending with the Sorkas unveiling their super weapon, the Shroud, as well as the airship that will channel its power. So as you can imagine, chapter 12 is starting on a positive note. Gonna title this one as The Death of the Glasgow Gang, so you know things are gonna be cheery. First of all, the chapter starts off with the Sorkas obliterating one of the Victorian military ships. The capital is effectively cut off from the advancing forces of the Victorians for fear of attracting the ship's wrath. Additionally, the Sorkas have placed Norport facing the military siege, and sealed it off from the rest of the city, essentially turning everyone in there into hostages. Nevertheless, as the base of the Glasgow Gang, its remaining members, Baird, Cador, and Delphine, seek to maintain order within the area, to varying levels of success. Unfortunately, resources were already scarce in the area, and with the complete lockdown of the area, people have even begun resorting to cannibalism. Even Oripity is on the rise, as people are killing infected in the streets. Quite a lot is happening in the background, but none of that pertains to Siege. Baby girl is going through a bit of a crisis. She knew things wouldn't be easy after coming back, but the disaster that is the Victorian crisis has not been kind to her. She is beginning to question why she even came back in the first place. She quite literally has accomplished nothing, save running from a vampire and retrieving a useless piece of metal. And to top it all off, her home is now being used as a human shield against the Victorian military. The Duke of Castro, through her Trilby Asher Sir Bellingham, assists Rhodes Island with entering Norport. Siege's reunion with the Glasgow Gang is not filled with happy memories for long, as due to the people rioting, Morgan reveals the secret of her heritage. This works, mind you. The starving populace calms down, knowing that the king of their country stands with them. It is, however, a strain on the relations within the Glasgow Gang itself. Delphine is fine with it. She is, after all, the daughter of the Duke of Windermere. Cador, on the other hand, hates nobles, and even though Siege has been nothing but good to him for all the time they have known each other, doesn't change his mind. So yeah, Siege isn't in the best mind space right now. But she does begin wearing the clothes she wore during her time with Glasgow, as opposed to the outfit she wore while infiltrating Londinium. It is this chapter that forces Siege to make a decision in regards to whether she wants the throne or not. Is she being forced into taking it, or is this something she actually desires? I'm sure she's thought about it all before, but that was prior to witnessing everything she once loved about Londinium burning down around her. And I do mean that quite literally. Again, Eblana enters Norport to confront the Damaski cluster. Their battle resulted in flames spreading across the city, and as such, Siege organizes an evacuation of the citizens of Norport. Of course, mass panic sets in as the city is quite literally burning down around them. Baird goes back into the city to rescue a deaf old man, but in the chaos he ends up fatally stabbing her. And she bleeds to death on the streets, while Siege evacuates the civilians. Indra, of course, wants to go back, but is stopped by Siege. They already have more than enough on their plate, and the entire area is covered in flames. This moment right here is the culmination of Siege's journey through Victoria so far. A mixture of her own indecision and the actions of others keeps taking the things she loves from her. She could hunt down the poor old man who killed Baird, but what would be the point? Killing him wouldn't bring back her friend. At this point, all she's thinking about is that what if she never came back? Maybe Allerdale and Baird would still be alive. But she doesn't have the ability to do that. She has to live with what she's done. Or should I say, what she hasn't done. All she can do now is keep putting one foot in front of the other, leading us into chapter 13, where Siege finally becomes the people's leader. Thanks to the efforts of Delphine's mother, the Duke of Windermere, the citizens of Norport are being carried away from Londinium via landship. However, things would never be that simple, as the Sorkas attack the ship. The Sanguinarch and the Damaski cluster attack the Duke, resulting in her death. Meanwhile, Amia is abducted by the Sorkas, with the remaining Rhodes Island members chasing after her. This leaves Siege at the mercy of the general staff remaining after the Duke's death, who promptly kick her and any infected refugees or soldiers out. Without a landship, Siege leads the people across the battlefield on foot. One of the remaining soldiers, Shira, begins making a scene, but Siege is really not in the mood for it right now, beating him senseless before sending him away to chase after the army that abandoned him. Shortly after, Bellingham once again appears before Siege, offering his condolences to Delphine before offering to trade resources for the Size of Kings. Siege refuses. It may be a useless piece of metal to her, but she'll be damned if she'll let a duke use it. He leaves behind some supplies for them anyway, cause unlike his boss, Bellingham is a cool dude. He also provides her with an outdated mobile terminal, through which he receives an SOS. Following the message leads Siege to Horn and Misery, who were separated from Rhodes Island following the attack within Londinium. As such, Horn has been defending civilians from a Sorkaz attack. Siege takes command, and following a week-long battle, Siege is successfully able to repel the Sorkaz. She is almost killed during the process, but she gets better. Upon awakening after the battle, Siege discovers that Shira has returned to the group, and he begins treating the patients in the camp. She has won at least one person over to her side, and she knows what she has to do. She has to look out for the little guy. The Dukes simply fight the Sorkaz without any care to the devastation that is left in their wake. So Siege refounds the Exemplars, a legendary army from Victoria's history, made up of all those who Siege has saved. From here, she leads the Exemplars across the battlefield, leading her to the town of Brentwood, where she and Rhodes Island reunite, successfully liberating the town from the Sorkaz. From here, the Doctor organizes an assault on the Sorkaz position, housing Lifebone. Siege and the Exemplars engage the Sorkaz force, while Amia, Logos, and the Arknights trio battle the Sanguinarch. With the victory of Rhodes Island against the Sanguinarch, the Exemplars have truly taken a chunk out of the Sorkaz force, although their battle is far from over, which leads us into Chapter 14, the Return of the King, the culmination of Siege's struggle across Victoria. Picking up pretty much right after the battle over Lifebone, Rhodes Island, the Exemplars, and the Sorkaz mercenaries prepare to launch an attack on the Shard using Lifebone's ability to travel through time and space. But unfortunately for the squad-registered trademark, the Sorkaz aren't just waiting for the Shard to be taken out. The Nashkahur has rallied his forces to him and has deployed them across Londinium in the path of the advancing Victoria army, preparing witchcraft altars that empower the Sorkaz under his command, combined with the power of the Shard to crush the Victorians. The Dukes advance regardless, bringing the full might of Victoria's military against the Sorkaz. Even Dublin temporarily joined forces with them in order to defeat their common foe. Unfortunately for everyone, the Shard begins generating catastrophes on a scale beyond anything seen naturally, literally reshaping the battlefield around Londinium, covering it in a constant barrage of Originium. This event is even capable of knocking Lifebone out, causing the squad to crash into a valley in the middle of the battlefield. Now stuck in the middle of an active war zone, Siege leads the Exemplars, supported by Rhodes Island, towards the front lines, hoping to use the power of the Size of Kings to disrupt the destruction befalling her home. The noble weapon that symbolizes the authority of the royal line has been pretty useless since she got it in Chapter 11. The Size of Kings is said to possess the ability to prevent catastrophes, although, as Siege has come to know, it is just a normal sword. However, when Arknights' Excalibur is plunged into the stone of the sword, it is able to actually use these incredible abilities. It is more of a key than a legendary weapon, its power not tied to a specific hero or bloodline. Anyone who plunges the sword into the stone may take the place of a legendary hero who parts the very clouds themselves. However, of course, our lovely lion would be the one to take up that mantle. Therefore, the Size of Kings must reach the front line, and the stone needed to activate it is located on none other than the Duke of Castor's ship. Mr. Bellingham once again appears to guide Siege to the Duke's ship. Bellingham doesn't hide the intentions of Castor from Siege. He in fact tells her about all the schemes pertaining to her in order to make sure she knows what she's getting herself into. Of course, Siege agrees to continue on anyway. At this point, she doesn't want glory or honor. She just wants to save Victoria, to save the people who have placed their hopes in her. The battlefield is a mess, with Dublin and Victorian's forces struggling to withstand the force of the Originium storm battering against them. Even the mighty warship of Castor is destroyed in the fighting. As the stone is the most important thing on the battlefield currently, Siege rallies the Exemplars to push forward to the destroyed landship. The cost of failure is more than just the death of a duke, but the destruction of the remaining morale of the Victorian army. Bellingham once again ignores the orders of Castor to take the Size of Kings from Siege, believing her to be the most worthy of the honour of bringing hope back to Victoria. The Exemplars even receive the aid of the last Steam Knight, who crashes into the battlefield to protect the Size of Kings from corruption. So, in one final charge, Siege reaches the Stone of the Sword and plunges the blade in, releasing a burst of golden light that slices through the catastrophe and dispels the originating pollution in the air. It doesn't destroy the sword or even end the threat to our homeland, but Siege's actions have given the mother of all morale boosts to the Victorians, and the tentative alliance between the Dukes and the Exemplars is solidified into a truly united front that would hold out until the end of the conflict. Although the climax of Chapter 14 is Amia's battle to uphold the dream of Babel, Siege played a pivotal role in her journey to reach Teresa. If not for Siege securing the Victorian lines, the remnants of Babel would have been consumed. And with that said, the story of Vina Victoria, the not Queen of not England, comes to an end. Not really, obviously, she has her whole settling into life following the Victoria Crisis thing in her own separate altar event. But you know, that's for another time. I want to save it for its own video, because this one already covered like 3 years worth of Siege content, so she can have a little bit more as a treat. I know it wasn't a good or great journey for everyone, but I like the reluctance she showed in stepping up to her role as a leader. Not everyone can be this naturally born leader like say Amia, or be an unparalleled fighter like say Noel. Siege, while immensely capable, is just not quite on the level of some of those characters that we have grown to know and love in this story. And she doesn't need to be. I don't need every character I like to be this incredible badass who is always capable and always makes the right decisions. It's probably why I enjoyed reading about her so much. Her reluctance to make a decision, her hesitation, while I'm sure it could be very annoying to you, also led to her having some actual moral dilemmas, like especially at the end of chapter 12, where she had to pick between saving all the civilians or going back to try and save her old friend. Now, you might not agree with her decision, or you might agree with her decision, but regardless, it was something that say, wouldn't be necessarily brought up in some other cases, especially if they want to portray their character as always being perfectly right and perfectly knowing what to do. With all that being said though, I do want to hear your thoughts on Siege. I may have made it sound like she had a pretty compelling through line in her story, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but I know how videos like these can make things seem more coherent than they might have appeared in game. So please do put your thoughts down below. Although, if they are negative about the lion, I will be banning you from the channel. We only need supporters of the line around these parts. You can call me cringe though, I don't really care. I will simply cry myself to sleep in the warm embrace of our king. Y'all, be good people, and I will see you in the next one. The next one in this case being Siege Altar's event, just in case you didn't pick that one up. You know, normally it could be anything. Like, genuinely, I don't know where I'm going with this bit. I thought it was going to be a little bit funnier, but you know what? Be good people.